Hi there, my name's Stacey Chapman and I'm delighted to be here at Janome head office today to talk to you about our new wonderful exciting project, which is the Janome Big Skill Share with Stacey Chapman, focusing on freehand machine embroidery. It is on the back of the fantastic Janome quilting competition that I took part in myself last year during lockdown, and now I'm back and this new exciting campaign is actually under my wing, and you're going to be learning how to do freehand machine embroidery and get to send all of your well wishes and create your own postcard for Her Majesty the Queen on your sewing machine, to use your sewing machine as a drawing tool and convert your drawing into a piece of sewn fabric art, and then you can take this versatile craft and move that forward in your craft portfolio, and it's a wonderful skill to have. So join me as your own skill share, and it's great to have you with me. Thank you. So when you're thinking about creating a picture, it's important to have an idea what you're going to be creating. So you can either pre-draw on your blank canvas, which is your rectangle, or you can literally just put it under the machine and just doodle under there. Whatever makes you feel comfortable is all good. It may be an idea though to just pre-think about what you're going to do within your canvas. Think about the composition. Will you have a border? Will you have everything central? Make sure that as you're drawing that it fits well into the space and isn't going to sort of disappear off either side, and make sure that it's appropriate for what you want to do. So you can just sketch, pre-sketch, even if you don't want to draw directly onto the canvas. You can pre-sketch any sort of funny ideas that you have. You can do something that's very simple and pared back. And you can also just put ideas, what symbolism is that you think of with the Queen. So for instance, a very simple crown. If you want to go really simple, that can work beautifully well. I've appliqued here, but we're just going to be outlining today. But whatever works for you, if you want to do something that's much more elaborate, then you can really go to town with this as well. So just make it work for you. Think about what you would like the Queen to see if she were to see your postcard. What message would you like to gift to her within your imagery? And also think about what really matters to you about when you think about the Queen. What comes to mind when you think about the Queen? Is it the coronation? Is it her wave? Is it any number of things? Whatever you think is good. And we want to see your individual take on Her Majesty. That's the most important thing. And also will make the better project because it's really coming from your heart. So go for it. It's all good. So good setup and good prep is really important with freehand. You want to make sure that this is purely a mechanical pencil, if you will, that is static. And so if you are going to draw, KTS years ago told me this, and I think it's a great tip, that you have a static pencil, and in order to draw with the sewing machine, then you actually move the paper, and it's a little bit like doing that. Once you get used to it, then it's a breeze. So you just want to make sure that everything is as it should be. You have to drop the feed dogs. That is absolutely imperative. If you are unable to do that, then you can put a plate over to prevent the fabric and your hoop being pulled in one direction, because you need free movement to be able to move around. So that's incredibly important. On this machine, there is a little lever at the back that you change, but on different machines, it will be in a different place. So do check your manual. You also want to check your manual to make sure that you have the appropriate setup for every single machine that you have. And so therefore look in your manual for the setup for either darning or for free motion. Either are perfect for this. The next thing is your foot. You have to have, in my opinion, a darning foot. or a free motion foot. This is a convertible free motion quilting foot set, and I love it. It's my favorite foot I've ever used, actually. So I've got a circular disc, but what's wonderful is it's got some markings on, and so that actually helps you as you move your work to be able to gauge if you're trying to get something sort of lined up. This is a great thing. Now, the reason why this is really important is because it actually holds down the work as you're moving as you're moving your work through. So as you drop the presser foot, then you can see that the actual foot lowers down, and then that will compress the fabric next to the machine and it stops it from jumping about, which is really important. You want to make sure that you've got good quality thread. I have got some Madeira, and it's a new eco Madeira thread, which is called Sensor, which is wonderful, and it's quite a matte finish. I'm using either blue or black thread for my postcards for the outline, but again, I would advise you to do that for your outlines, but if you want to add other colours in from there, then go for it. And put your speed dial onto it. If you have a speed dial on your machine, put it onto a medium setting. It kind of makes you think that you need to go slowly, but actually it's much easier to go at a medium speed, and then the actual speed comes later. You can add to it and you can change it around a little bit if you want to change your stitching, but medium is a good place to start from. And as I said, set your machine up individually for free motion. It really does make a difference for your optimum settings, and then we'll get our equipment ready and then we're ready to go. Okay, equipment wise, these are the things that I would recommend that you have to hand to create your postcard. So I have got a dissolvable pen. These are really useful, especially when you're going to be writing out the lettering, even if you don't pre-write the whole thing, just to work out your spacing. So you could get a water soluble or an air soluble pen. They'd be great. You can just use a pencil very lightly if you want to, but these are easier to see. You need a pencil. Make sure it's sharp, or at least got some sort of lead visible on it. These are fantastic double bent scissors. I'm not sure whether I've got the terminology right on that, but basically you need a good pair of really sharp, pointy little embroidery scissors that can really get into good little tiny spaces to cut your threads at the end. You want a wooden embroidery hoop. Anything from about 5 to 8 inches is good. The reason I say the reason I say wooden is because otherwise I find the plastic ones actually get a little bit stuck on the machine, especially if it's a bit hot. So I would go for a wooden version. Then you need your template, whether you've downloaded that on janome.co.uk or whether you actually have bought your kit, a pre-printed one from artsycraftsy.com. So I've got my templates for my front and my back of my postcard there. And then again, if you want to recap on any of the things that we're going through right now, it's a good idea to have the basics leaflet, again from artsycraftsy.com, which will go through all of these stages that I'm talking about with the freehand machine embroidery. A couple of bits of stabilizer. You need them to be large enough to cover the sides of the postcard, or one large sheet, hopefully, if preferable, with a little bit of a margin around of about 1 inch for your design, and then just a sheet of A4 paper just to be able to doodle on and make sure that you've got your designs correct in your head and what you want to write out for Her Majesty, and then we really are good to go. So let's hoop. I'd like you to take your hoop, taken into 2 parts please, and then I'd like you to take the larger part with the adjuster and place that onto a flat surface, preferably a table or something. Make sure there's nothing underneath it, it just makes life easier, and we're all about that. So let's take a piece of stabilizer, and then you place that centrally in your hoop, and then you're going to take your either traced out downloaded template from janome.co.uk or your template which is pre-printed like this one from artsycraftsy.com. And what I'd like you to do, because we're going to be doing the blank side of the postcard first, we'd like to put that centrally within the hoop. So make sure that you can sort of press it round with your fingers, and then just make sure that the corners are all within the hoop. So I believe this is an 8-inch hoop that I've got here. You can use a smaller one, you'll just have to move it around a little bit. Once it's in the right place, then give it a bit of welly, really push it down, make sure that it's flat all the way around the edges, because sometimes if it's protruding, it's more difficult to get underneath the machine. Once that's all nice and flat, that feels really tight, and you can tell because it makes a tambourine sound. And make sure that it's all in on the back. And then once it's there, if it's a little bit loose, then you can always use your forearms and then actually just press down and then pull at the same time and take that all the way round. Once you've done that, that really will take any looseness out of the fabric away. And then when you get to that stage, then just give it a bit of a tighten with the adjuster and we're all good to go. Right, so what you want to do when you're going to think about what you're going to draw is just doodle. Just literally put the pencil down. Forget about worrying about any of it, and literally just take your pencil and your hand on a bit of a meander, warm it up nicely. Maybe take it round the edge, just have a think, and while you're doing that, think about the fact that you need to fill a blank rectangle with your postcard. So therefore, if you're going to do something circular, then make sure that that's going to be in the centre of your rectangle. Think about all of the other space in between. And if you're not going to have anything at the sides, then maybe just think about putting some kind of border in, because it really does help. You could literally just do a line of squiggly stitches around the edge of it. The best thing to do is just really use this to thumbnail ideas around. The same as I have here on my piece of, in my sketchbook. I've just been thinking, Queen, what comes to mind? So right now, I think what I'm going to do for this first sample that I'm going to do on camera is actually to do a very simplistic queen, similar to the one that I've actually given as a download. But this one is going to be really pared back, almost like a stick queen. So I'm just going to think about where she'd be. I'm going to give her a big old hat, I think, bit of a flower, and bit of curly hair, and we're going to give her a couple of really simple legs. She has to have a handbag because of her secret coding that she does with her handbag when she doesn't want to talk to anyone anymore, I believe. I think she changes hands or something. I don't know, maybe that's just me and my imagination. And so I think I'll do something very simple like that on one of my postcards. So just by literally just sketching that out on a piece of paper before you start stitching, just really helps with your confidence. And the confidence side of things with freehand is massive. You really need to just allow yourself to be a bit frightened, but do it anyway. And if you're not frightened, then that's even better. Just go for it. So that's the picture side of things. When it comes to the well wishes that you're going to give Her Majesty, make sure everything's in the positive. We really don't need any negativity with this. It's all good. So what I'd like you to do is think about the fact with your postcard that you've got a really exciting opportunity with the stamp to go wild in the aisles and do something really crazy out there. So think big with the stamp. That's the bit I'm really looking for when I see your entries. And then where we've got the address side of the postcard, then I'd like you to write in to Her Majesty the Queen, and then the full address of Buckingham Palace, which is on the instructions. And that's a big part of the competition terms and conditions, because I'd like everyone's entry to have something that is the same. But on the other side of the postcard, I'd like you to think about what you'd like to convey to Her Majesty on this really special Platinum Jubilee year. And And if you want to be really ambitious, you could write a couple of sentences, a few sentences. But if you're new to this, I would really highly suggest that you just do a few words. So maybe congratulations, and keep it as simple as that. Even that's quite a long word. Check your spelling. If you're anything like me, being creative, my spelling's not great. So do check that before you go ahead and start sewing, or just keep something simple to Her Majesty, well done. Just rewrite it down, what you're going to write. Make sure that you're happy with everything, and make sure that your positioning is going to fit on. For instance, I've had a problem with one of mine when I first did a sample of fitting in Buckingham Palace. So what it might be an idea to do, because Buckingham is a very long word, so I would make sure that basically that there is enough room. So just maybe even put dots, measure out what kind of spacing you need per word, allowance and London and whatever, and just maybe even put some dots in place and then go for it. And then we'll talk about actually how to write the text in a moment. So you have your machine. Now how do you make it draw? It's through these rather than any program. This is literally you drawing with some thread. This is not a pre-programmed thing. Lots of people do get a little bit confused between that. So therefore, how on earth do you create a stitch? How do you draw with this? So I'm going to do the scary dairy thing and actually not pre-draw on this particular a simple postcard that I'm going to do for a demo. So before we get to that stage, I'll basically just talk you through how you actually create some stitches. So for instance, if you want to create a straight line, then I literally would push the hoop forwards and back to the side or whatever, but basically whatever you do by moving your hoop is how you will create a stitch. If you want a tiny stitch, you move your hoop very, very slightly. If you want a massive one, then you really give it some welly, and whichever direction you move in is how it will come out. If you want a zigzag, then you have to zigzag your hands. If you want to pretend like you're moving along the Californian coastline and you're on a lovely big smooth road, then, and you're turning your wheel very slowly as if you've got a baby in the back, you don't want to wake up, then that's all good. So just think about whatever you're actually doing with your hands is what you're going to be creating. So I'm going to, for demonstration purposes at this stage, just create a very simple triangle, which is going to be Her Majesty's sort of stick figure version. So I've turned my my postcard round to portrait rather than landscape for this version. And I'm literally just going to imagine the sort of size that I would like my triangle, and I want to create some 3 straight lines. So I'm just imagining that I'm going to bring the line over in this direction, so therefore the hoop goes in that direction. So I want to sew down here, and I'm going to move the hoop diagonally in this direction. So I don't worry too much literally about starting or stopping all of the stitches, sort of what I call casting on and casting off, because you're going to be the stitches are heavy enough to be able to catch properly, because you're not going to be washing it or wearing it. It's a picture, and if they do come undone a little bit, then it's fine. You can just go over them again at a later date. I just like to sort of start and get on with it. Okay, so now I'm going to come for the straight bottom of the triangle. So I'm going to move my hoop in this direction. And I am adding a tiny bit of a curve into this because this is the bottom of Her Majesty's dress. And then, so I've come over here, and now I need to go to complete the triangle and take it back over, add another triangle, another straight line to complete the triangle, and hey presto. Now you will notice that I purposely went a little bit quicker on, you heard the sound of me actually using the machine a little bit quicker on the last line. and you will note that the stitching is changed because I moved the hoop quicker. So therefore, if I put my foot down a little bit harder, then you will end up with smaller stitches. And if you take your foot off the accelerator, if you will, then you'll end up with longer stitches. And the only way to really understand, I believe, how to do this is to do it. So be brave. This is the moment. Take a deep breath and go. So let's sew the queen. I'm going to do this simplified, really simplified, almost stick version of Her Majesty. So we've already just done we've created the triangle, which is going to form a very basic kind of indication of Her Majesty's dress. And so I'm doing this purely because it's really nice and easy to follow, and if you don't want to pre-draw something, this is probably quite a fun little way to do it. And remember that you can always add some applique in, or even draw onto Her Majesty's dress as well if you want to add anything in. So what I'm going to do now that we've got the triangle, I'm just going to do sort of like probably about 85% of her head, and so I'm just kind of guesstimating where a big circle would sort of emerge from her dress. And I'm purposely not putting the top bit of her head in, because otherwise I'll have a line that I need to then that will be covered over by my other stitches. So I'm just imagining where her hat brim would start, and then I've created almost like a sort of a D shape, I guess, and I'm just then creating what's called a drag stitch, which is going from one side of the semicircle over to the other. So in order to create a drag stitch, you literally just lift up the presser foot and then you drag, as it says on the tin, over to the place that you want to then finish your stitching again. And then once again I would just lower the needle by turning the hand wheel always towards you at your final destination, and then just resume sewing again. Now what this creates is actually a straight line that can be cut away by literally inserting your scissors underneath it, or it can be left in place. And I'm going to leave this in place because it's the perfect hat brim that's just been created. And what I'll do then is just trim the thread next to it, and then you can see that there is a perfect sort of almost cup shape that's been created there for Her Majesty's very basic stick figure head. And then I'm just going to continue with the hat brim that comes along over here. So because I'm going to the side, I'm moving in the opposite direction from the direction I want to sew, and then I'm creating the other underside of the hat, and then I'm going to come all the way back over those stitches again, and then repeat on the other side. And then come back to the center, and then we'll see how we're doing. So at the moment she almost looks like the rings of Saturn or something going on around. So I'm then just going to come up from there. I'm just imagining where the hat brim would actually come to, so it would come up a little bit, and then I'll just stitch over, creating almost like a saucer like sort of brim to the hat. And again, you can see at this point, if I'd have carried on with the circle, that would have carried on and actually gone into the hat brim, which wouldn't have been good. And then I'm just going to draw in with the thread the top of Her Majesty's hat, the style that she's been favouring for a number of years. She looks a bit like a Monopoly, no, I've got that wrong, a Cluedo kind of person now, which is quite fun. I really like that. So there's got two really important things down here. She'll topple over without a pair of legs, so we'll just sew down a couple of lines, and then at the bottom of the line there'll literally just be another semicircle with a flat base to it. 1 foot. I've lifted up and then dragged over again to the beginning part of underneath her skirt, adding number 2 leg, and then a straight foot at the bottom. Oops. And again, it's going to be messy, but that's part of the fun with freehand. It is meant to be messy, and it's meant to be funny and sort of characterful. So just be playful with it. If you do that, you'll get the best out of all of it. So that's making me laugh, so that's a good sign. Okay, so then there are two more important things that need to go in: the arms and, of course, the handbag. Okay, so the hand is just going to come down as a funny little sticky figure over here. I'm going to go back, and then I'm just going to add that so this arm goes straight down. I could even put in a couple of funny fingers if I wanted to. It's making me think of Purple Ronnie, those cartoons from many years ago. And then I'm going to draw another semicircle, which is a bit like a horseshoe shape, which is the handle for the handbag. Then a straight line across, and then the handbag comes down, round at the bottom, straight back up to the top, and then I'm going to draw a few lines, and you can hear that the sewing machine is now going really quickly. And so because of that, the stitches that I'm creating are really quite small. And I wasn't going to, but after looking, it's a good idea to evaluate where you get to. So she's quite fun. So if you see from there, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to pop in a little bit of hair, which is a little bit bulbous, I guess, and a couple of lines to show the texture. And then actually I'll just sew all the way around to the other side, because that almost creates a shadow underneath the hat brim. And voila, we have a very funny little queen. Actually, there's one thing missing. Give her a bit of a flower. And there is your postcard. So now what I want to show you, this is a really important part. So if you're using a machine that doesn't have an automatic bobbin cutter, and if you ever try it, you know you'll never go back, just a pointer. You really need to trim all of the threads on the front, but also on the back. This is the most important thing, because if you get any loops on the back, then that's the thing that gets pulled down into the feed dog area, and that's where you have problems, and that's what makes the machine jam up, and then it gets caught. And if that ever happens to you, then please don't carry on sewing. It's really important. It only ever gets worse, believe me. I've tried, and it's really frustrating. And when you first start freehand, it's one of those things that puts you off. So what you want to do is get some nice scissors, and instead of cutting like this, you want to cut so that they're flat on the back of the actual canvas, I would call it. And then keep cutting until all of the loose threads have been completely removed. And then once you have, you can pop it back underneath the machine again and carry on stitching. In this case, we're now going to be moving over to the other side of the postcard, where we're going to be writing the well wishes to Her Majesty. So now we're coming on to the text, and so we're going to be creating your message, your well wish to Her Majesty, which again we need to remember is in the positive. That's really important, especially if you want to enter the competition. And so what I'm going to do is going to be creating two different versions of the way that you can actually create the type. So if you choose to do capital letters all the way through, you'll end up having to do, well, I believe in my own style, drag stitches in between each of the letters. So you end up sewing each of the letters individually, and then you'll end up finishing off at one point of the letter, and then you'll have to then drag stitch over to the beginning of the next. And so this spare little bit of thread, you then just insert your scissors underneath, and then you just chop it after all of the letters are finished. And you can do that by dragging from one word to the next as well. So that's how you would create it if it's capital letters. That's your preferred way of writing. However, if you want to freestyle it, and it really is very pleasurable, and you end up with something a little bit more characterful, I guess, as well, is that you end up with basically joined up writing. So you start at one point, and then you literally just move your hoop in these circles to create this lovely flowing text. And I am going to attempt that now, wish me luck, without pre-drawing for my message to Her Majesty. And then maybe I'll do a little bit of the capital letters on the other side. Okay, so let's get on with the text. So I've decided just to keep it really simple on this one, on this side, and I'm just going to put yay. So that for me, it's really important to have these lovely little curly ends. I really enjoy doing those. So they tend to figure a lot in each of my texts. And there we go. It's that quick and that simple. And that's why sometimes by not pre-drawing it allows you that sort of creative freedom and to be much looser with it. And you can end up getting a really lovely effect. And I ended up doing quite small stitches with this actually, which was quite unusual for me. I normally stitch when I'm doing text with longer, but I quite enjoyed that. So that just meant that I put my foot down a bit more this time. So I'm just trimming away now the drag lines in between, and I'm not quite so happy with the A, with the side of the A. So the joy of freehand is that if there's anything you're not so keen on, you can go over again and then make it right. So I'm just going to do that. And also, if you've created stitches that are actually really quite small, and so therefore it's not so legible, what you can do is go over the text and actually reinforce the areas that would really make a letter look like a letter again, even though it is a bit wonky. So for instance, with an R, you may need to reinforce either the side or actually over on the or the straight part of the R as well. So all I'm doing now, because I reinforced the side of the A, I am adding in a few extra lines onto the sides of the letters so that everything matches, because that just looks better pictorially. If you make an adjustment to one letter, I would suggest that you carry that through onto each of the letters so that everything matches. So there we go, I'm happy with that now. And what could all my messy edges, little bits of thread. It's a good idea to have a little container to keep your threads in at the side of you to be able to keep everything under control. Otherwise, like me, they might end up on the floor and then end up with a messy studio, which I am known for. So there's the yay, which is great. So that's fun. And so now we'll go round to the other side, and we're going to create the capital letters, which are a different method, as I discussed at the beginning. So I'm once again just make sure that you keep getting into the lowering the presser foot. If you ever have any problems, that is the place to start. Double check that you have actually pressed down the presser foot, because that's normally where most people's issues may come with not putting that down. So I'm now going over to create the capital letters for Her Majesty's address. And this is part of the competition brief. It's quite important to us that the formal address is actually put onto each of your entries. I would like you to note when you're doing your text that you want to kind of try and make sure that all of the letters are actually in a similar line, even if it's not dead straight. You'll never get it dead straight, but just be mindful about where all of the letter positions should actually be. So on this one, I've done several samples now, and I've done the same thing again. The Buckingham Palace line is a squeeze, so, and it does look a little bit like it's a squeeze, so you may want to pre-write that one out, or just, as I said earlier, just pre-measure it. And there we go. So that is the finished text. I've already trimmed all along the front as I've gone, so I'm going to turn it round again, and once again give it a good trim on the back, which is really important, as I mentioned earlier, and it just keeps everything nice and tidy. If anything does come undone, you can just go over it again at a later time. And now the lettering is complete. I just wanted to say as well, if you feel nervous about doing the lettering, the best thing to do is just give it a practice before you actually get onto your final piece. It'll just, you get into the rhythm of actually moving and getting used to it before you actually finish off. And then you've got a much better chance. You're setting yourself up to win, rather than to be nervous about it. So do everything you can to build confidence, because it really helps. So what we need to do now, I think, is a very exciting part of the project, is the stamp. So what you want to do is, there are a number of ways that you can approach this, and I'd love to not actually give you too much direction, because I'd love you to approach this as the most creative part almost of the whole project. Maybe leave this one till last. That's what I would do, as a bit of a sort of treat to yourself, to go wild in the aisles with it. But remember that maybe stamps have perhaps a little frilly edge to them. Maybe that's something that I will point out. So again, I'm just pre-drawing that with the Air dissolvable pen, basically deciding on whether I would like to go over that with stitches or not. And if you're a little bit nervous about actually drawing the profile of Her Majesty, then you can again use the pen to pre-draw that. Remember that you don't have to do everything from scratch. You could actually just applique out the kind of shape of Her Majesty's profile, or you could even actually put a stamp in there and actually just sew over that if you wanted to. But all I want you to do is just be as creative as you can. I'm going to try and be brave and do a little freehand funny stamp. And the reason why I'd like to do this actually on camera is purely because it may well go wrong, because you're doing something quite fiddly. So the best thing is to just approach it with sort of like open eyes and just have fun with it. If it's wrong, you can always just applique over it. So there's no pressure. Just enjoy yourself. So the way that I'm starting with it is basically, it's kind of almost like a teardrop shape that I'm that I'm creating. And then again, I'm thinking of those Cluedo characters, the sort of the illustrations that you used to have with them, with a very thin neck. And then the hair that's bulbous that kind of comes round. And this is going to be quite almost cartoony like, which goes along with the whole look of this particular postcard. And then I'll come over to the front, and then I'm going to very gently sort of pop in a little funny nose, and that may well be enough. And if that's kind of correct, that's pretty, do you know what, for doing one on camera, I'm quite happy with that. So oh, that's a relief. So there she blows. So the point is, just have a go, and sometimes it'll work out, other times they don't, but you never know until you try. And again, you can always try on another separate piece to get you into the flow of it, or just pre-draw it. But the point is, you need a stamp, otherwise how else is it going to get to Her Majesty? Okay, so I have cut out front and back of the postcard, and then I have just gone over to the iron, and I have pressed, so I've cut around the edges, the outer margin of the edges of both of the postcards, and then with these little the little mitered edges, I would like you, if possible, to do a bit of a fiddly thing, and then maybe just finger press those down, those very tiny little edges. The reason being is that if you can then fold those backwards, then you don't get any sort of tufts of fabric of thread coming through, and it gives a nicer sort of cleaner edge for when you're going to cut it back. And then all I've done is that once they were all cut out to size, I've just pressed it underneath the iron. I finger pressed it down until it cooled on each of the sides, and then I've ended up with a sort of box-like effect, if you will, almost like a cardboard boxy type effect. And then what I'm going to do is literally pop them back to back, so wrong sides together. I'll match everything up, and then I'll go round. I'll start at one corner and I'll pop in a pin, trying to make sure that they're as aligned as neatly as possible, and I'll go around the edges and make sure that's all pinned. Okay, so we now have, look at this, it's almost there, a postcard which is now pinned almost like in a Union Jack, Union flag esque pinning episode. And what I'm going to do now, I am going to create the edge and a bit of a border for Her Majesty on the front side, and I am putting this together. So I've put the sides together and I've left the stabilizer in place. This is my preference. You can take the stabilizer out if you'd like to. So all I'm doing is a single line, and if it's tidy enough I will keep it as a single line, but if it's a bit untidy I will create a double line border. So I've just got to the edge of the corner, and so what I'm going to do at this point is I'm actually going to push the needle down. So I use the needle down button, then lift up the presser foot, the same as you would if you were sewing properly, because it's just showing you a different way of doing it. And then you're turning all the way around nicely to carry on with your next right angle, to carry on straight ahead. Now this is when this foot also comes into its own, because there is actually a line along the actual circular foot that visually guides me to actually draw a line. And if you follow that, it's actually really quite effective. So once again, I'm getting to the corner. I'm going to hit the needle down, turn around, drop the presser foot again after I'd lifted it to go around the corner, and then just push it forwards. Now obviously it's a bit confusing because you might think, oh, I'm straight stitching now, so it should just carry itself, but obviously it's not going to do that because the feed dog's down, so you're still having to push it. But by leaving the stabilizer in, it keeps it actually really quite stable, funnily enough, and therefore you're able to sort of really give it a bit of push. So once again, dropping the needle, turning round. I'm not quite at the edge actually. I'll do one or two more stitches. Yeah, that's more like it. So I'm visually just kind of guessing where the border is sort of in comparison to the other sides, so that we're fairly matching. And again, on this foot, I've sort of got guidance of using the inner circle that's marked out on the foot to be able to use that as a seam guide, which will hopefully give me a straighter line. And I'm just removing the pins as I sew. And this line is not meant to be really straight. If it was, I would change over the foot, but it's sort of straight-ish. That's what I'm after. When I get to the end of this line, I do actually bother to go backwards and forwards a bit, because I'd rather that this actually did remain in place, instead of if there were the occasion that it did actually undo itself. Because the mood took me, I've just decided to add a few little sort of spiky bits to the corners, as if it's almost like a picture frame, just because as I was sewing it came to me, just as a finishing touch. And just cut down the excess thread. It's all good. Ta-da! There we have a finished postcard for Her Majesty. So that's the front and that's the back, and it's got a nice weight to it, and what a lovely thing. Make sure that this postcard is all about you and about how you feel about the Queen, and it should be an expression of joy and learning. And I hope that basically whatever you take from this particular skill share of learning from Janome, of learning your freehand machine embroidery, that it serves you for the rest of your creative life. Thank you very much.